Hi everybody, and you're very welcome to Capricorn Radio. It's the 1st of March today, and I've got that spring feeling in the air. On the show today I'm going to be discussing ancient Egypt in an effort to unveil some of the mystery of this ancient culture. Today's guest is Dr. Carmen Bolter of the Pyramid Code fame. Don't forget you can log on to capricornradio.com, and there you can subscribe or check out the guest biography and necessary links to their website. So let me see, can I get our guest on the line? So I have with me now on the line Dr. Carmen Bolter, author of Angels and Archetypes, an evolutionary map of feminine consciousness. Carmen is also the producer of an immensely successful documentary series, The Pyramid Code. And should you want to seek out any more information on today's guest, you can visit www.pyramidcode.com. Or you can check out on biographies, all the biographies on Capricorn's homepage. So without any more delay, let's bring on our guest for today. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, Carmen.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. You know, Carmen, I've had a few Ancient Egypt shows now, as you know, and I'm from my guest list, and I've been excited about this show coming up for a while now. And in the fullness of research and preparation for each show, I like to get an in-depth look at the work of each guest. And as you know, I invited you on to talk about the Pyramid Code initially, but I'm rather glad I got the book Angels and Archetypes also, because I really synchronized with the book and the information within it. And I guess there's a lot of information in there that's a precursor to the Pyramid Code. But I guess before we get into either work, could we build a picture for the listeners about Dr. Carmen Bolter? What got you into this line of research, your authorship, and indeed your career, Carmen?
Well, I started having past life memories when I was a little girl, and they were about Egypt. When I first had them at the age of 6, I didn't realize it was Egypt. And I was always a really avid student and loved writing. And I founded the Women's Therapy and Research Center in Calgary in 1982. And I was dealing with a lot of women's issues. And I formulated 17 programs, and I could see that things were really clustering in archetypes. And so I wrote the book with 22 archetypes and their higher selves or angels. And it's kind of an encyclopedic array of things from matriarchal cultures. And actually, the truth is, the way it started was at the Women's Therapy and Research Center, I was offered 2 full-time research assistants from a local college. And they said that they could research anything I chose. So I really gave it a lot of thought. What would be, if there was one research question, what would it be? And the question was, what happened that gave way from matriarchal cultures to patriarchy? And that's where they started digging, and what they were finding is articles, but the feminist journals that the articles were in were not found anywhere because most of the patriarchal institutions wouldn't subscribe to them. So I ended up having to research where the feminist journals were, and it turned out that they were at the Simone de Beauvoir Institute Library in Montreal at Concordia University. So I spent a whole summer digging through those archives, and that's really what led to the book.
Right. That's fascinating, you know, and I think that's the thing that really grabbed me in the book and the Pyramid Code was you bring to the table this matriarchal to conversion to patriarchal society, and I'd never heard about that before, Carmen. That really grabbed my attention, and I went, well, why don't we learn about this? So, you know, you've really brought this to the mainstream, and basically, well, let's get into the book. I mean, you talk about this multi-dimensional evolutionary map of feminine consciousness. Perhaps you could explain that, Carmen, just get into the specifics of the matriarch.
Well, my training is as a psychologist, and Carl Jung talks about archetypes. And whether we're conscious of them or not, they still exist. They have a life form of their own. And so I started looking at astrology, numerology, and tarot, and how they were actually the secrets of the ancient Egyptians that had to be symbolized because of all the persecution. So the original teachings that came down became reason to be killed during the Inquisition. So a lot of the information was coded. And so when I started to put it all back together, I realized that's exactly what had happened. And so I was tracing for any kind of fragment from matriarchal cultures. And of course, many of the books were burned and most of the people were killed, and the whole thing was driven underground. But when you think about astrology, it usually isn't defined in such terms. But with the 12 astrological signs, there's earth, air, fire, and water, 4, and then cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And the way to think of that is the seasons, where you begin with the charge, cardinal, all the energy in the seed to build the whole plant. And then fixed is kind of the middle of the summer where everything's just cruising. And then mutable, we're getting ready for the next season to come through. And so if you mix each of the 3 with the 4, you get the 12 zodiac signs. So there's only one cardinal fire sign. And so these become archetypal energies. And so what I did is I assigned a goddess to each of them through history. And a lot of times when you're reading mythology, you'll hear, you know, Diana was known to the Greeks, but it was really Artemis to the Romans, and it goes on like that. And you just end up completely confused of who's who, and they're crossing Hathor with somebody else. And you think, well, wait a minute, does anybody really know what's going on? So I decided to give them, you know, one name, to give the history, to show how a woman's consciousness could be connected to that particular archetype. But what the real truth is that, and Jung will say this, and psychologists would say this, is if you're driven by one archetype, like the Persephone daughter, which I've defined as the bulimic daughter, it's complex, and you're driven by it. But really, to have a full slate of full consciousness, we need to be able to include every archetypal aspect. And so when it's an evolutionary map, it's showing all the pieces of ourselves. Now, there's one goddess named Baba Yaga, and I call her the queen of the bad hair day. And so if you don't, lots of people say, oh, well, we'll just leave that in the shadow. I don't want to be like her. But if you don't pay her her dues and pay attention to what she's actually drawing out of the psyche, she'll come get you and put you in bed for 3 days, like you get a cold. So, so if you're running all the archetypes, but you drop one, then that's the shadow. And that's the thing that drives the unconscious. And so really the goal is to be fully conscious. Now, in our society, profit is the highest value. So how would our society change if consciousness was the highest value? And this is what becomes important about matriarchal cultures and feminine consciousness, is that the smartest, most spiritually developed person was the leader. They also shared leadership so that someone else could hold the reins for governance, if you will, and realize the pressure that put someone under. And they never got paid. They'd get their robe and their lunch. But it was really about serving the whole. And we've got that all backwards now. And so finding the roots of matriarchal cultures become very informative in terms of how to live well. And that's why it's important to dig it up. And so it's my conviction that the patriarchy's agenda has been to erase evidence of everything other than itself.
Exactly. That's definitely something I see, and I that's why I kind of synchronize, because I'm good with history, Carmen, and I've dodged a lot of mythology, and I've dodged a lot of anything to do with angels or archetypes. I'm drawn to the history, Carmen. I'm drawn to the ancient technology, and even in your book, you identify me as that, as I'm the patriarch. I'm more affiliated with time and timelines and history, and that's just me. And I kind of needed to read this book in a way too, Carmen. So that was really good for me. I guess just tell us about the religious doctrines, because this is what you're talking about, the erasing. These have really tried to stamp out the feminine consciousness, or as you say, erase any evidence of it.
Well, and Mary Magdalene is depicted as a prostitute. And there were holy prostitutes in the temples, even in Babylon, where the men would come back when there was warring. It was the beginning of patriarchy, and then they'd go to the temple and release their energy and get aligned. And the sacred prostitutes were actually doing spiritual work that helped. And Mary Magdalene was a high-level initiate in Egypt, and she was trained in sex magic, but it was all distorted to make her into a prostitute. But also there's very little feminine consciousness in the Bible, and you get Mother Mary, and that's about it. And it's all the patriarchal images that come forward, and that's just incredibly damaging because it leaves us unbalanced. And the dire situation that the planet is in right now is a result of lopping off feminine consciousness. And it's not like matriarchy is not the opposite of patriarchy, where women drag men around by their hair kind of thing. It's not the opposite. Matriarchy leaves more for the children, respects nature, works in harmony with natural forces, and seeks balance. And so women have a masculine side and men have a feminine side. And I'm finding it fascinating the way my book has a resurgence of interest in it now. It was published in 1996, and it was way ahead of its time. People didn't know how to understand it. But the other beauty of that is I wouldn't have the patience to sit down and write it now, because I did 13 drafts of that book and, read 147 books the year before I published it. And it took it was a real work of love, that thing, labor of love. And so, I think we've all kind of moved into shorter attention spans and wanting to see videos instead of reading and writing. And so I'm really glad I wrote it before. And it was surprising to me that people didn't know how to understand it. And all of a sudden, everybody's looking for it now.
Sure. And, if you had shown me that book when it came out in 97, I'd have been in my 20s, but, I'd have just laughed and went, what's that all about? I wouldn't have got it, and now I woke up spiritually there about 8 years ago, Carmen, and I'm on this path now, and I love it, and I just want to soak up as much knowledge and information and learn about cultures and everything. And it's not that I didn't, I suppose, Carmen, but yeah, I agree with you. That book was definitely ahead of its time, and it must be really good for that to be still rolling out copies when it was printed in 1997, Carmen.
Yes, and now I've got an animator who's making the scene that goes at the beginning of each chapter, and so each goddess has a spot, like a little environment with environmental archetypes, if you will. And so we're making a virtual reality, and it will be a course in my new online learning and social action network called interactive-u.com, interactiveu.com. Yeah, And so people will be able to explore that, and it also will be interactive. So you can click, and you can paint your own runes. So it functions like an oracle as well. And so, you can make it like angel cards. And so, yeah, it's a fun way that you can just see what the energy is for the day. But it also has the spiritual teachings, because the higher selves of the archetypes are angels. And there's a spiritual teaching that goes with that that's beyond the dogma of religion. So religion's very much organized. Spirituality is connecting to source on your own, and religion is giving your power away to someone else to tell you, what to do and how to feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing, I guess, that the archetypes are the gateway to femininity and masculinity, and I kind of picked that up in the book, and it's something I hadn't been aware of, and there are these archetypes out there, and I guess the book's a lovely blend of astrology, psychology, and spirituality all mixed into one. Is that fair to say, Carmen?
It's absolutely fair to say, and that kind of sounds like me. So it really is an attempt to bring. It's just amazing to me, having worked as a psychologist for 17 years, that people don't really think in terms of reflective consciousness, checking in with themselves. Most of everything that we're offered in society is a distraction, right? And so when the psyche can't resolve an issue, it seeks distraction. So that's like compulsive eating or compulsive exercise or watching TV, and basically our culture teaches us to live in a constant state of instant gratification and distraction. But that's not the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess just for the listeners, tell us about the left brain and the right brain thing and the psychology of that, Carmen, because I think that's important to define the masculine and the feminine.
Well, thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. First of all, let me start with an example. They did some brain research on sex offenders in jail, and they found out that they were completely right brain deficient. And the right brain is connected to the left side of the body, which is feminine consciousness. And the opposite, so the left brain is connected to the right side of the body. And our society is totally left brain focused. So in other words, if you can't see it, it's not there. So reading, writing, arithmetic, time, history, concrete things, science, prove it. And the right brain is what you can't see: symbol, mystery, timelessness, and all of the spiritual aspects that are very, very real. But our society's basically said, no, that's not there. Well, the other thing that goes with that is if you don't get caught, it's not wrong in our society. And so you can lie. We expect to be lied to. So we really, really are lopsided. And so sex offenders that are completely devoid in their feminine consciousness are going to little girls and to women and stealing the feminine energy, because nature seeks a balance. So you probably haven't heard that before, but it's like it's encouraged. Like, it's been defined that our governments are run by psychopaths, and they don't have to be connected to their feelings. And so what we're doing is we're reinforcing ill health and psychopathology instead of reinforcing balance. Now, if you look to the ancient Egyptians, they had these crowns that had like a serpentine going across the midbrain and to connect the two sides. And everywhere you look in Egypt, it's all about balance between the masculine and the feminine. And so one of the things we need to realize is that patriarchal Egypt started in 3113 BC, at the beginning of the Mayan calendar. And there was a whole world of Egypt that existed before that. And so again, when most people are looking at Egyptian stuff, they're looking at the patriarchal aspect of it, which is highly significant, because there's many, many secrets that are, right there inside the symbolism in the frescoes. And so the Egyptians insisted on a balance between the masculine and the feminine. And that's the secret to full consciousness, because both sides, feed each other and work in harmony. So I did my master's research on this. I was, looking to see if you could change your internal image and the balance between the two hemispheres of the brain. And again, what happened if they weren't in balance? And so what makes somebody a good subject for hypnosis, and how does it all function in the internal image? Because we all carry and feed an internal image of ourselves. And sometimes that's not correct. Sometimes that comes from things that people have told us. And we end up with negative personal laws, like I'll never get it right, or I'm not lovable, or I can't do it. And all of that's negative. And the brain just says, yes, boss. So when we really understand the brain functioning, we can then take ourselves into full consciousness. And that's what Tibetan Buddhism is about. That's what the discipline of Tai Chi and all the different meditation, yoga, ancient practices are really about, developing consciousness. However, even our school system, and certainly what's shown on TV and in pop culture, is about denigrating consciousness, about completely distracting us to the point where we don't know who we are. We're who we're told to be. It's not knowledge in school. It's figuring out the answer that the teacher wants and giving that back. And at the end, you forget everything. But what's knowledge? So, I think that everything that's happened in our society that's had us arrive at this point has been by design. And it's up to us to fight back and become conscious.
Sure. You just mentioned hypnosis there. I was going to ask you my next question about people my father's a hypnotist, and he doesn't do it as a profession. It's something he's done in his spare time, and he's been able to heal people. But he's left-handed, and I just wonder, does he use a different part of his brain? Is he more in tuned? Is a male who's left-handed, does that affect them in terms of their feminine consciousness and masculinity?
I'm really enjoying your questions.
I tell you why, Carmen, because I've just been wondering this before the show, and I was actually going to bring up hypnosis and my father, because I just see my father as this masculine peer to me. But, I know I'm very different to everybody else, Carmen, and I tell you why. My father's always told me to seek out the alternative viewpoint. And if you look at me, statistically, I shouldn't be talking about any of this, because my whole family is male-dominated. I have 4 brothers, no sisters. I've always wanted a sister. I've had nothing but uncles, and they're all engineers and architects, and I'm in this male-dominated kind of immediate world. But my father, yes, he's told me to research the anomalies, the evidence, world mysteries. We used to read world mysteries books and the unexplained when we were kids, and and he, as I say, he's a hypnotist healer, and he never did it as a profession. And I always wondered about him. He plays music by ear, maybe something like 10 instruments. He can just pick them up and play them by ear, but he can't read sheet music. So I wondered, is that the left brain feminine consciousness thing at play, Carmen?
Yes, and in my day, they didn't want anybody writing with their left hand. They'd strap it behind your back and force you to write with your right hand, which emphasized the left brain.
My father was beaten for it. He told me that. He was beaten for using his left hand.
Well, think of that. I mean, that is just absolutely horrid. And I always love it to discover that someone's left-handed.
Me too.
Sorry,
I have a nephew who's left-handed as well, and he's so bright. He's 5 now, and he's switched on, you can just see it in him, and we're kind of all waiting, because we always talk about my dad being left-handed, and he is a quintessential genius,
Yeah, but I think that being ambidextrous, working with both your hands, both your feet. I happen to be right-handed and left-footed, which is interesting. I discovered that with gymnastics. Yeah, and anyway, so the point of the matter is that we need both sides switched on. We should be practicing with both sides. We should respect both sides. But someone who when you're talking about your father's talent, I also think about past life things. He probably was a musician in another life. But again, one of the things of patriarchy has been to erase the notion that we live again. And that's a tool of the church. And the church is breaking down as we speak, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Catholic Church has been, and again, if you don't get caught, it's not wrong. So they've been hiding all this, the immorality that's been going on and money laundering and everything else. But, they really want us to be in this life, and it's over. And there's nothing a carryover from other incarnations. But again, looking to the ancient Egyptians, they were very well versed in 2 things. They have 2 main concerns. One is, how do we get here? Biology, birth, fertility, and incarnating and getting here on the earth plane. And the other one was cosmology and what happens when we transfer into another state. But they didn't have a word for death. And so, so most of us don't have this, again, consciousness of another incarnation, of cellular memory. And I think there's a lot of new kids, like you're talking about your nephew coming in, and they're brilliant, and we're drugging them. We're giving them ADD medication and all that other stuff. And, the GMO foods and whatnot, the kids are really sensitive to those, and then they're ending up with Asperger's or something like that. So, it's been said that Da Vinci and Einstein would be on meds if they were in school now.
It's funny you mention that. I was put down for having Asperger's and ADHD myself when I was a kid. But I do have a very high latency, Carmen. I definitely do. And I'm definitely switched on. I was building radio transmitters when I was 10. Very much right-brained. I did it as a hobby because my father's a mechanical engineer. He retired when he was 40. He had a couple of businesses, but that was his profession, but he's always had this other thing, and he's coached me to do my own ham radio, and I had my own FM radio broadcast station that I built from my own electronics, and he couldn't buy me any more kits anymore, and I kind of had all this kind of very much the stereotypical Asperger's, what would you call it, like a stereotype, but not Asperger's though, and I think some people are too quick to label people nowadays, Carmen.
Oh, absolutely. And they want everybody in rows, and that's just like the industrial kind of style of education. But I'm going to tell you, I think it's harvest time for the black sheep.
Yeah? Yeah. Tell me about angels then, Carmen, because my father would talk about angels, and I don't really get, and I don't really get kind of about angels. I don't have a good knowledge of angels or mythology. They are linked to the consciousness, or higher consciousness, I should say. Would that be right?
Well, yes. Now, again, certain words and certain constructs have been outlawed. We're not supposed to think about reincarnation, consciousness, never mind that. And now angelic helpers, forget that too. So all of us have guides. And again, it's largely misunderstood because we're not supposed to have the conversation. So there are many, many different levels of disincarnate beings, and some of them are very low level and low astral level. And that can be someone who perhaps died in a fire in a house, and the house got reconstructed, and then people move in, and they're ghosts that open and close the cupboard doors or turn the burners on or something. and they're just annoying, and they're stuck in the lower astral plane. That's not what we're talking about here. Angels are sophisticated beings that are on the other side, and they have a way of densifying themselves momentarily. And if we can elevate and refine our vibrational frequency, there's a point where we can meet. Sometimes it can't be sustained. So they're vibrating at a higher frequency. And so I say, faster can see slower, but slower can't see faster, right? It's almost like more pixels on the camera. You get a better picture and you can zoom in on it and blow it up. And on a low pixelation, you basically can't do too much with the picture. So many people who will say, "Oh, never mind about angels. That's just, gobbledygook." Well, they're just telling you they're dense. Sorry. And so all of us have angelic helpers, but think about it. If you had an angelic helper who told you to bring your umbrella, and you read the weather report and it said that it's not going to rain today, and the angel keeps telling you to bring it and you don't, well, if I was the angel, I'd go help somebody else. Most of us get the signal and the intuition and then don't listen to it. And so we can develop, it's like a muscle. You can develop your relationship with your helpers and learn to listen to them, and they will reveal themselves. They will show themselves to you in light. And so even now, with the higher megapixel cameras, we're able to see orbs and energy beings. There's all kinds of beings that are showing themselves, plasma beings, and I've been collecting photographs like this. And there's many, and you can train your eye if you keep on looking at pictures, and your eye will start to be able to perceive just outside the visible spectrum. And that's where the angels are. And so, I mean, I've got a big file on this. I've been working with my guides for a long time. And I did conscious channeling for a long time. And, there's a way that we can develop our psychic abilities. And this is something, again, that was normal to the high-level initiates in Egypt. And so they would develop this, they would train for this. And this, again, is where all the mystery schools and the secrets are that we've just, swept under the carpet and denied. And it doesn't mean it goes away. I mean, just because a whole society is based on what you can't see isn't there, doesn't mean they went away. I mean, what about all the car accidents where two cars get completely smashed, and the people survive? And there's been photographs of an angel standing there, or an entity of some description. So, even people who don't believe they have guides, maybe taking all the credit for them, and they just think they're smart. We don't have this in our collective conversation. And I think it's high time that we change that.
Sure. You just mentioned orbs there, Carmen. You must have my question list here in front of you, because I wanted to talk to you about orbs. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a singer in the UK called Maya, M-A-Y-A, like the ancient civilization. That's her name. It's her artist name. But she recently documented some photos, because she gets photographed a lot on stage. Apparently there's a lot of orbs traveling around with her. Now, there's a YouTube documentary. If you Google it, it'll say Maya with orbs, and I don't know if you're not familiar with it. It'd be worth a look to you, Carmen. But she has orbs above her, and they seem to be an internal structure to the orb. And there's this one that has like a little notch inside the orb, and it seems to be following her. But the thing is, she's a singer. She's going to different countries, so this orb is appearing in another country while she's on stage. It is totally fascinating, and she's just got pictures after pictures of this event, well documented.
Okay, so this is one of her guides that follows with her, travels
sure.
with her.
And that's something I've only realised, this whole orb business. I mean, I kind of need things like that, Carmen. Some sort of little bit of factual evidence. That's the male in me. That's that kind of, I need to see something to run with it, and then I'm open to everything, So, but
sure. Well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because they can come into the physical, and so we can see them. And I've got a lot of experience with the way guides will position themselves. If you imagine yourself standing inside a sphere, I think that they have a location where my guides show themselves to me in different colors. And different sizes, and sometimes they have a little bit of a mood. So one day they'll look a little more turquoise, and another day they'll look a little bit more cobalt. But they will, show themselves to me only in a momentary kind of thing. But I know they're there. And so, also with orbs, they've been becoming more complex. So when they first started showing up, first of all, they like sacred sites, music, and joy. And so we've got music and joy going on with Maya on stage. And when we're around the pyramids, dancing horse party, I mean, it's like a blizzard. Some of the pictures we take, you can almost not even see the horse and the rider, because there's so many. But over the years, the same way that crop circles have become more complex, so have orbs. So there's little rainbows inside. They used to be round on the outside, and now they're geometric patterns. But in the last 2 years, in the pictures, particularly in Egypt, they've been showing up as bands of light. But then we started using, because we've got better cameras now, And we started using film. I recommended that when we went into the shrine to Sekhmet at the Karnak Temple in Luxor, Egypt, that we film instead of just taking stills. And sure enough, here come these orbs that are traveling across, that are appearing and disappearing, and it's just fascinating, completely fascinating. Because there is a video on YouTube of Sekhmet, and it shows exactly the same thing as we were able to photograph in that same place in December. And so that means that these entities are probably inside this shrine. And it's one of the only statues that's left in situ where it was found, because most of the artifacts were brought to the museums. And so it's just fascinating because the dimensions, the sacred geometry within the location and the shape of the architecture of the shrine are also dictating the energy which supports the beings that are hanging on to some kind of energetic and allowing themselves to show themselves to us. And so I think part of all this phenomena has to do with a shift in the energy that's bringing a more refined energy to us. So, as we've experienced the dumbing down through the school system and the densification of the energy and war and fear and negativity and damage to the planet and all that stuff, it's dense. We've been in a dense energy in the Iron Age, the dumbest of dumb. And it's interesting that they try to tell us that we're the smartest we've ever been, because that sure isn't true. And we've just made the transition through this December 21st, 2012, starting to head up toward more refinement. And it's going to take a while before the entirety of the planet is there if we make it. But we're moving toward a state of more refinement, and that is how we are able to see this phenomena that existed. But there's been seers and clairvoyants in every stage of the patriarchal densification that have been able to break through that. Mm-hmm. And right?
Sure. I'm just thinking about some of the little tidbits of facts that you have in the book as well, which I really enjoyed, Carmen, for that as well, because I like knowing the origins of words and the origins of practices or cultures, and you gave us the role of marriage and the orange. I didn't know any of this, Carmen, and I would never have known that unless I read Angels and Archetypes, but that marriage was forced upon the feminine, that it was like that to have a lover was like to have somebody outside your marriage, and even to have the origins of the phrase rule of thumb that you went into as well, so these things, these little extra bits of information, I like having that in there too, Carmen. That was really good to read that.
And let's share that with the audience. The rule of thumb comes from a man was allowed to beat his wife with a stick no bigger than his thumb.
Yeah,
and a man's thumb is quite a lot bigger than a woman's thumb, and
that's a hefty stick.
Abuse of women.
Yeah, and that was till as late as the 1960s.
Yes, I know.
Okay, Carmen, hold it right there. We're going to take a break and be back in just a moment. And we're back with your host, E.A. James Swagger, on Capricorn Radio, talking to Carmen Bolter, producer of the successful Pyramid Code. Hi, Carmen.
Hi.
Hi. So you were just talking about Medusa there, Carmen, before the break.
Yes, in the Amazon tradition, the women would hang out with each other, and then they would go and meet with the males and procreate. And then when they gave birth, they gave the boy babies back to the males, and they just kept the girls. And the whole idea was, that there was the feminine that was keeping the feminine alive. And this was right at the transition between matriarchy and patriarchy. And so, of course, a woman knows that she's given birth. And I always thought that the baby should have the same name as the mother, and that's the true matriarch in me. But all of it was about power and control and fear of women, because they tend to be more balanced. And it's, because they're connected to the cycles of time and the cycles of life and periodicity and all of that. And that's where a lot of the fragments were kept of matriarchal cultures for winemaking and beer making and bread and, yeast, things that fermented, and moon cycles for planting and that sort of thing, because it worked. And everything else that had to do with feminine consciousness was relegated as evil. And look at the mess we've gotten ourselves into from a lack of connection to nature.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Carmen, I was telling you that we're living in 1984, George Orwell's novel, and that this patriarchal society is ever more evident to the general populace. It's not this kind of deceiving hierarchy anymore. It's quite openly in your face, I think.
Yes, and some people are still blind to it. That's for sure. But I think the gig is up. I think internet helped us with that. And but the thing is that how do we stop the few people that are controlling the rest of it? That's been a concern of mine, because I think that having traveled to 52 countries, and Egypt counts as one, and I've been there 28 times, I've seen many, many people around the world, and I think we all want the same thing. We want love and respect. And then we've got these crazy people that want everything for themselves. I mean, we have to move from me to we in terms of concern. And I think that, if they stopped having, a cog in the wheels, that we actually could clean things up quite quickly and Mother Nature could restore herself. But as long as it's all about profit and short-sightedness and, a few people making a lot of money at the expense of everybody else, we're really at risk. But, there's the movements that have tried to stop things have been squashed as well. So I think we're at a very interesting time.
Yeah, and, it's interesting, all right, Carmen, and it's I just thinking about news being played out on cameras now, and it's more like propaganda. There's this like propaganda media game that they play, and there's what goes on behind the scenes and what they say for the cameras, and it's
false. And in preparing to go to Egypt with a large group for the 2012, there were all kinds of media stories that were coming out, and I have teams on the ground in Egypt, and I was talking to them every day, and the things that they were claiming were happening were not happening. And then when we got to the museum, to Tahrir Square, anything that you've seen in Tahrir Square for the last 3 or 4 months, maybe even longer than that, it wasn't possible because they've excavated and they were on a construction site, so you couldn't have stood close anyway.
Really? So you've done quite a bit of traveling there, Carmen. How many countries did you say? 52?
How many times?
52 countries, did you say?
52 countries, and Egypt 28 times.
That's insane. That's a lot of traveling. There's a name for a person who travels, a dromomaniac. Is that correct?
Perhaps. I took 44 flights last year.
Yeah, a dromomaniac is a person who yearns to travel, and it's a passion they have to yearn. So maybe
now I yearn to stay home.
Yeah, you probably. Yeah, see, I've done 22 countries in Europe, but you know how big Europe is. I mean, you can put Europe inside the United States, so it's like you walk 100 miles and you're in another country. So, but yeah, I've done a lot of countries in Europe, but that's like it kind of burdens you after a while. There's the burden of the travel gets you. Like the novelty soon wears off, I think.
Well, I've been at it for a long time, and now the novelty has worn off. But it doesn't mean I still don't have business in other countries. I don't travel much for pleasure. I travel for business.
Sure, Carmen. Let's get into the Pyramid Code, because this is why I wanted you today. But like I said, I really enjoyed the Angels and Archetypes book, and I kind of got an insight into you too, Carmen, and I got an insight into, I guess, how the Pyramid Code came about in some parts of it anyway. But tell us about the Pyramid Code for the listeners that aren't familiar with it, because I'm sure you're going to watch it after this show, Carmen.
It's a 5-part documentary series, and it actually started because of Hakim, who's an indigenous wisdom keeper.
Ah, he was one of my questions, so yes, excellent.
Yeah, I'm reading your question list from here.
I think so.
I worked with him, studied with him for 10 years. I spent a lot of time in Egypt. I lived there for a little while. I actually had a place for 2.5 years, but I'd go back and forth and rent flats and that sort of thing. And so whenever I was in Egypt, I would go and visit him every day. And he had information from the oral tradition. He was born in the village of Abu Sir, which is just a couple of miles from the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid. And now his family home, where his children still live, is directly across from the Sphinx. And he had quite a bit of knowledge, and he was getting old, and he was severely arthritic, and most people don't live as long as we do here in North America and probably in Europe, in Egypt. So I thought it was important to capture his knowledge, but he didn't put a lot of effort into trying to prove what he knew. He just knew it. And so my task with the Pyramid Code was to find scientists that would corroborate some of the things that Hakim said, and I could use, what Hakim was saying. And so that's the process that I went through to build these 5 episodes. But now, I ended up with 9 hours of footage of Hakim, which is 58 single-spaced pages of him. And, of course, And so what I'm finding now is that there's more people talking about the things that he was talking about way back then. That we interviewed him, I think, in 2008 and 2009, and then he passed away as we were in post-production. It's almost as though he waited for us. And even in the footage of the Pyramid Code, you can see he's walking on the sand in several layers of socks because he was so arthritic he couldn't even put shoes on anymore. So he passed away shortly after we finished the footage, and so mission accomplished. We were able to capture his teaching. And so I'm actually planning some additional episodes of the Pyramid Code that will also air through Interactive View.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's funny because I would call Hakim the star of the show, because I know there's other people there and they have a lot of stuff to bring to the table and a lot of revolutionary theories that have enlightened us to ancient Egypt. But Hakim, he looks like a bit of a character, and he's got some ancient wisdom there, yeah? So.
Sure, and he would say things that no one else said that I knew in my bones. So, for example, that the Sphinx is feminine. I know feminine consciousness, and perhaps the head was refashioned, but certainly the energy is feline. And he would refer to her as Tefnuti, and that's feminine. And they're also a lot of references to cat people in the Peshat, the Sechet, and even the Hathors, a feline sort of thing. And the high-level initiates had black panthers and large cats that they would communicate with telepathically. And if they went to the edge of the band of peace and somebody ordinary who wasn't trained as a high-level initiate approach, they would have that ferocious cat wild energy. But when they were in the company of the high-level initiates, they were, quite docile and telepathic.
Mm-hmm. We were talking about the modern world there. I think the modern world should just stop what they're doing and just take note of ancient Egypt. Like, I'm a big on ancient Egypt, but you talk about the empowerment and that we have lessons to learn from ancient Egypt. I guess that's what I'm getting at, Carmen.
Well, empowerment is the whole thing, and disempowerment is the modus operandi of the patriarchy. And most children are disempowered in school, taught what to think. It's all deconstructive and critiquing Shakespeare and whatever instead of making something, constructing something, and finding something that's meaning-centered. And so, because of this blindness and lack of critical thinking, it's been quite impossible for people to look at Egyptian artifacts and see what the message is. But I often think, if we are reincarnates, and I'm quite certain that I had at least 3 important incarnations in Egypt, and we knew that we were going to go from this high state of a golden age into ultimate densification to the point where we practically destroyed the planet, what would we leave for ourselves to trigger our memory? And that's what I think is on the temple walls. And, for all the trips since 1977, standing there and reviewing pictures that I've taken on recent trips, I'm still realizing and having new insights. And it's staggering, really, because that's what consciousness is. We can only contain and be aware of what we are aware of until we increase our capacity to perceive. And that is a lifelong journey. And then things that were staring right at us suddenly make more sense. It's a fascinating process.
Sure. You're talking about reincarnation there, Carmen, and I believe in reincarnation. I don't have any direct connection with ancient Egypt, but my fiancée reckons that I was a scribe in ancient Egypt, and the reason she says that is because I'm obsessed with ancient hieroglyphs and Babylonian scriptures, the cuneiform, and I can translate some stuff in. I translated the first time I was with my fiancée. She had a picture of ancient Egypt, and I was reading some of the text to her. And I can't read hieroglyphs. I can translate some parts of it, and I'm just obsessed with ancient Egypt. I have a whole row of first editions of Wallace Budge there when I was like 22. Egypt is I think the first book I read was The Splendor That Was Egypt, and I was captivated from that day, and I just wanted to research everything about it. But the hieroglyphs really appealed to me, and I think she always says that I must have been a scribe in ancient Egypt. And you talk about reincarnation. Maybe I was, Carmen. Who knows that? I'm certainly drawn to it.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. And by the time I was 32, I had evidence of 86 past lives, and then I stopped counting. And I think that it's to me it's obvious that most of us are still acting from and moving from incarnations we had before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the way you put that, Carmen. Definitely, yeah. We're acting upon past lives or past notions, or I just know that I have an obsession. It's beyond an obsession, Carmen. I just have pictures of hieroglyphs all around my house. It's just I can't get enough of it, and it really appeals to me. You're talking about consciousness there, Carmen, and particularly to ancient Egypt. They put really high value on consciousness. These guys were all about the conscious being, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Balance between the masculine and the feminine.
The masculine and the feminine. And
they didn't think you could do anything without balance. And so at the entrance to every temple is a winged disc right on the top. It's like it would touch your crown chakra as you walked in. And the other thing was the idea of surrendering the lower self to the higher self. And that's what's reflected in angels and archetypes. The angels are the higher self of the archetype. And so we release the ego, the me, the day-to-day routine. And then as entering the temple, even the ordinary populace who weren't trained as high-level initiates, they would do the collective work for we as they walked into the temple. And that was like, basically dropping your ego at the door and consciously telling yourself that you're going to release for the collective good. And so that's what holy work is. And the temples are actually sacred geometry and reflecting the cavities of the human body. And so everything's a metaphor. And the Holy of Holies, the altar, is situated where the pineal gland would be, which is the master gland, which connects us to our spiritual self. Now, one of the things that's true in the diabolical, nefarious, patriarchal stuff is that they put fluoride in the water, and that calcifies the pineal gland, and they know about that. Yeah, so even at the Vatican, they've got this enormous pine cone, and that's kind of what the pineal gland looks like. And most people are shut off from their spiritual selves because their pineal gland is calcified and they don't even know.
I just had a conversation. Sorry, Carmen. I just had a conversation with somebody today about there's a major magazine in Ireland, and I mean we're one of the most fluoridated countries in Europe, in the Republic of Ireland, that is, and they've just got it into the magazines. I don't know how. It's a music magazine, but it's a mainstream music magazine. One of the local pop stars here is giving out about the fluoride in the water, but yeah, it's insane. Just on the winged disc, Carmen. The winged disc appears in the Middle East as well. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, that's so. I'm not sure that it's reflecting the same symbol as that. I mean, sometimes people think that it's spaceships or who knows what. I won't claim to have expertise necessarily in the Babylonian culture, but because it's different. The Egyptian ones has the uraeus, which is the snake, and the wings are the wings of the vulture. And the vulture, Hakim will tell you, was the symbol of the sacred feminine, and the uraeus is the sacred masculine, and it's all wrapped around the sun. But the idea of the birds, they've got many different kinds of birds, and in the hieroglyphic. And the idea is they can walk on the earth and they can fly in the sky. And so that's like we are really spiritual beings temporarily treading on the earth. And that's represented over and over again in many different ways in the hieroglyphic and in the frescoes that you'll see in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Carmen, okay, right, let's get some, this is the big one for me now, the dating of the pyramids, because in the pyramid code you start off with an idea about the dating of the pyramids and timeline, and you finish up with that too, the chronology, and, it's not maybe what we're told, and I'm putting that mildly, but what do you feel, Carmen, yourself, about the dating of the pyramids? Do you have a time frame that you subscribe to? Because I think people in the alternative history world, which I'm in now myself as an author, but everybody looks at Egypt and they know it's older than 2,500 to 3,000 BC, and each one has their own subscription to a time frame of when they think. But do you subscribe to a time frame, Carmen?
Well, we'll never know for sure, and I'm resting on a date that I feel comfortable with, and Hakim would concur with that as well. But I'd just like to point out that patriarchal imperatives run the educational system. And if you're an archaeologist, you have to toe the party line. And I was all set to do my PhD in archaeology, but then realized that I couldn't tell the real story if I did. And so the degree to which someone is tied to an educational institution, an academic institution, is the resistance with which they have to let the date go further back, because the patriarchy is trying to tell us that we're 6,000 years old and nothing happened before that. And so there's been a real movement that if artifacts were found of giant bones or whatever, that they'd be buried again. If artifacts didn't fit with the story, they'd be taken to the Smithsonian Institute and then put on a ship and dumped into the ocean. And so we don't know how to think of archetypes. We don't know how to think of ancient times, and that makes it difficult because we don't have an open conversation. So I think 50,000 years. And I think that the ground plan where the pyramids are, and this comes from past life memory, had other buildings there before, other structures. Then the pyramids came. Now, Dr. Samir Osmanovic from the Bosnian pyramids just came with a recent discovery, and those, again, the mainstream media said, hoax, forget it, don't talk about it. They're not allowed to talk about it. And that's because it's threatening. And so, if you start to piece things together, and I've just been invited to do a teleseminar with him, and I'll be going to Bosnia this year.
Excellent. I know Philip Coppens was a big proponent for the Bosnian pyramids, an advocate of them, but I know he's now deceased. I don't think
he was going to be on my Egypt trip, and there's a lot of yes, and he ended up in the hospital a few days before we left, and he went from diagnosis to death in 2 weeks, so it's very tragic. But I feel a connection to him on the other side. I feel and my son passed away 2.5 years ago. I'm quite certain that Hakim and my son and Philip are together, and they play the same tricks. And this whole business of being able to perceive entities and all of that, I've developed a sensitivity to that because of losing, my son and Hakim, and now, Philip has been communicating with me as well, and I won't get into that. But the point is that Samir, he found poured stones, and between the third and fourth course, there was some organic material. And just a few months ago, he sent it to be carbon-14 dated, and we know that the older something is, the more the error is in carbon-14 dating. And so his sample came back at 24,600 years old. Yes, which is a whole precession, because it's probably plus or minus 1,200 years. But he says so that means the Bosnian pyramid's older than the Great Pyramid. Well, if you're using the old dating, the other date, the traditional dating. So Yes, and then Göbekli Tepe has been dated at 13,000 years. And we've got to remember that the older material is deeper. And both those sites were decommissioned. So the Bosnian pyramid was found full of silt. But the other thing, though, that's fascinating is that they're not restricting research at the Bosnian pyramid. They're allowing people to go in with their measurement instruments, and they're finding things. And I've been able to do some scientific studies inside the Great Pyramid over the last few years. I just collected over 300 readings of people in Egypt in December here.
Interesting. Sorry, Carmen, just go back to the Bosnian pyramids. How long has they been hypothesized as a pyramid or realized as a pyramid, whichever way you want to say that?
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
How long would have people been guessing that they're like pyramids? Or I mean, when did the story break about the Bosnian pyramids? When did people start realizing that it's probably a pyramid that's been heavily forested and washed down? And
well, not that long ago. Well, it's just like Göbekli Tepe probably was discovered 12 years ago, and most people haven't heard of it, and people think it's a recent discovery. So I think that there's been I actually don't have the exact answer for that. I'm thinking something like 8 years, but there has been so much media censorship about it that people are confused. So again, it's not in the collective, and a lot of people will just say it's a hoax. Like Robert Schoch went and said, "Forget it, it's not real," and Hugh Newman said that, and Robert Schoch went to Yamaguni and did one dive, which is just at the north tip of Taiwan and the south tip of Japan. There's all kinds of underwater structures, and Graham Hancock and his wife did 50 dives. And if you look at the pictures, I mean, come on, that can't be natural. So some people have an agenda, or they look at it too quickly, or they believe the mainstream media. And I think that we have to really take a scientific approach and look and put things together.
I think sometimes people are constrained. Sorry, Carmen. I think sometimes people are constrained, and maybe Robert was constrained, and I think he tries to push it as much as he can. Sometimes. Is that Robert, every time he does a presentation, he's got a different age for the Sphinx, and so in the last time I saw him speaking in Egypt, when I was on a panel with him, he had a slide that showed this in this year, like 2002, he thought the Sphinx was this old. But in 1999, he thought the Sphinx was this old. And now that we're in 2013, he thinks the Sphinx is this old, and he stands up there with great pride. Well, hello, the Sphinx is the age that it is. It's not 5, 6, 7 ages. And he thinks it's okay to keep changing the date. Well, I say that that's, maybe the constraint of being, attached to an educational institution that tells you that you're supposed to change what's traditional, but he's creeping his way back and legitimizing, a few years go by and then you're allowed to say it's 5,000 years older? Like, what's the truth? How do the weather patterns show? When did they have a tropical situation in Giza? Sure. I think Göbekli Tepe has enlightened him somewhat in the academic world, because he's allowed kind of go for that day. He didn't have the potsherds of an ancient civilization that they were looking for when the Mark Lenner story and him broke. So I think that's probably where he's coming from, yeah. But I quite like John West, 36,000 BC, and I tell you why, because he applies the logic. So I really like John. I had John on the show.
Well, and John Anthony West is not, he calls them quackademics. He's not tied to any educational institution. He doesn't mind saying what he thinks. Hakeem takes it back another processional cycle, and I'm inclined to agree with that. And so, and we'll never prove it, right?
But that's the way to think about it, Carmen. To think of it in processional cycles. It was aligned to Leo. The Sphinx was aligned to Leo, so it was going back. It was aligned every 26,000 years or another 26,000 years. But you're thinking in terms of processional cycles, now.
Absolutely. But there's also a slippage, and I've done a lot of work in Starry Night Pro, which is looking at the cycles again and the alignment of the Band of Peace, and that's not in the Pyramid Code. But if you look at Sirius and Orion and the Pleiades and Cygnus, which are sites in the sky-ground correlation, and all of the ancient star maps on the newly cleaned ceiling of the Temple of Dendera in the first hypostyle hall, all of these pieces are fitting together, but also other sites. And so by looking at the extragalactic grid, you can see how the whole thing, and if you keep those four planetary systems together and run it back like a movie, you can go all the way back to 99,999 BC and all the way forward that far, 99,000 years AD. And if you've got a star system that isn't part of that configuration, it doesn't last very long. It spins out because it's not part of that configuration. So the extragalactic grid has this alignment, and Sirius is actually in the center. And so it's been said that one of the star shafts in the Great Pyramid points to Sirius, but always points to Sirius. And I mentioned that to Robert Bauval, and he was like, no way, that's impossible. But now he's saying that too. And it's a fact. And Walter Crittenden, who's also in the Pyramid Code, said, you know, in Lost Star of Myth and Time, he was looking at the mythology of Sirius possibly being in a binary system with our sun. Well, I plugged it into Starry Night Pro and ran it, and it's right at the center. But if you go along the extragalactic grid and keep going, what do you hit? The galactic center. So it's like the nose of the bird, the spinal cord of the bird of Cygnus goes right through in a straight line, right up the spinal cord, straight to the galactic center, which is what our sun is just aligned to, December 21st, 2012. And then it comes back around to Sirius, which is represented by Isis. So not long ago, I'm sitting in my living room. Of course, my house is filled with Egyptian artifacts and papyrus. And I was looking at the headdress of Isis. And I've always like, why do you put a bird on her head? Like, come on. You know, like it just, like, why? I mean, what is the symbolism here? Well, if you go from the bird of Cygnus straight through the galactic center and connect back to Sirius, that actually makes an interesting metaphor to put the bird on the head of Isis. But it's talking about our alignment to the extragalactic grid outside of the galaxy. Think about it. It's incredible. I mean, the reason that we thought the ancient Egyptians, you know, didn't know much is because we didn't know enough to even understand the sophisticated quantum physics and the you know, connection to higher level beings, and we were told in school they worshipped animals. No, they were into the archetypes of the animal medicine and combining it. They're speaking symbolically, but again, if you lop off the right brain, then the symbols don't make sense because we're not used to speaking that way, and so the Egyptians are crazy. Enough said, right?
Sure. You know, in terms of the archaeoastronomy and stepping outside ancient Egypt for a minute, time and time again, it's these same constellations that they're obsessing about in ancient worlds. You're talking Sirius, the Pleiades, Cygnus, Orion. It's just the same constellations coming up time and time again, Carmen.
I know. But it's the world grid. It's there. And it was a unified field. Like people say, well, Atlantis is here. Atlantis was there. Atlantis. Yeah, Atlantis was a worldwide culture. You know, and you know, seafaring Egyptians were seafaring when they're talking about the solar boat to get the pharaoh to the stars. Why is it water stained, watermarked? Because it was on the water. Because the Nile had a different pattern, and that's clearly depicted in the Pyramid Code.
And they had the cocaine mummies as well, didn't they?
That's it.
You know,
okay.
So that's
cocaine
evident.
Cocaine is only from South America, and it's indigenous to South America, and every single mummy whose tissue has been tested has both THC and cocaine.
Sure. Which then gives you this tie-in. Was there an international trade going on, or were they actually going out to these other countries? Like, I mean, either way, there was transoceanic contact in ancient times. Like.
Absolutely, and if you look at Tiwanaku in Bolivia and the way they build their reed boats and take a picture of it and go and compare it to the temple walls in Egypt, those boats are identical.
Sure.
Honestly, they are identical.
Just another thing, you know, the Phoenicians are their name I think translates as the purple people, because if they used their robes had a purple dye in them. They used this special seashell that they crushed up, and it was a purple seashell, and they crushed it up to make this dye to dye their robes. But the Toltecs did the exact same thing with this special seashell, this purple seashell as well. So there's weird, yeah, they've got these weird.
Here's a little tidbit for you from Hakeem. The original manuscript that led to the Pyramid Code, I wrote it, was called Out of the Blue. And Hakeem used to always talk about the blue. You know, it comes from the blue. And he says that the pigment on the temple walls that creates the cobalt, there's no source of it. No one knows where that came from. That was one of his strongest convictions. Yes, and in Egypt, they're allowed to take fungus off of a fresco, but they're not allowed to add color. And so most of the time when you get something being improving in the color, it's because they've cleaned it. And they've used some kind of process to reveal what's underneath, and that's very, very evident at the Temple of Dendera in the first hypostyle hall, because it took them 2 years to clean that ceiling, and it is stunning now.
Yeah, I heard you talk about that before. Sorry, Carmen, I heard you talk about that before, and when they had cleaned it, there's all these reptilian figurines coming up with frogs and crocodile. Well, I can't remember. There was some reptilian figurines coming up repeatedly.
Yep. Yeah. And now I've got a professional photo shoot done of every inch of that ceiling in 24 megapixel camera with a tripod and the whole thing, so they're all square, because it's 40 feet up. And so the only way to really do an analysis of it is to blow up the pictures, because they're high enough resolution, and examine it. And so I've been looking at the ceiling for a long time, and it's the entire cosmology of everything, all things Egyptian, and everything that they were interested in, and we haven't had access to see it like in the olden days. And it actually looked like staring into a cup of black coffee. And so you can see that the shapes were behind it. But 40 feet up with poor cameras, I mean, we were really at a loss. We weren't able to examine it. And so, yes, there are all kinds of different beings. There's all kinds of counting mechanisms and steps. There's 14 steps, which could be the phases of the moon, 14 days waning, 14 days waxing. There are, animal figures with the thymus, in the proper place, which looks like one of the crowns, and Hakim talks about that, and that's very well explained in the Pyramid Code. Beings with 4 wings and 2 heads, so the ascending cycle of the 13,000 years of precession going denser, and the 13,000 years going to the light. It goes on and on and on. Nui, the star goddess, where the stars of the milk, the milk from her breasts is the Milky Way, and how these beings functioned. And there are 4 Egyptian goddesses: Hathor, Nui, Mot, and I forget right now, Hathor.
Sure. Carmen, I just going to ask you about Abu Roush. Forgive my pronunciation. Abu Roush, is that right? Roush. And there's evidence of machine tooling there.
Oh, there's evidence of machine tooling all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, well, all over the place, but particularly there. I remember that in the Pyramid Code. It's insane.
The concave.
The concave, that's right, yeah, the concave curvature.
And yes, and it would have had to be, there's machine tooling's everywhere, and Chris Dunn really helped us out with that.
Yeah, what do you think of Chris Dunn's pyramid theory? You know, I had Chris Dunn on the show recently for the Pyramid Power.
I have a lot of respect for Chris. He is an engineer. He's not trying to be a spiritualist. He is what he is, and he went to Egypt and had one of those measures that engineers would have, and he put it down on the stone and shone light underneath, and it was so precise that no light shone through. And then he went on and measured many different things, including in the Serapeum at Saqqara, which just has reopened but's been closed since 1996. So I've spoken at conferences with Chris, and I consider him to be a friend, and I totally respect his original information. He's not just copying what other people have said, like many people copy what Zecharia Sitchin said, even though you can't prove it. And this idea that being a power plant has a lot of merit, and I'm with him. I think it's great.
Sure. I think a power plant, you have to kind of broaden your perspective of what you think a power plant is. Is that power generating a health energy, or is it a power pack energy? You mean? Well,
again, it comes back to our distorted patriarchal culture that destroys things and has explosive energy, and Hakim talks about that. It's like our electricity is actually damaging to our natural beings. It gives us electrostatic energy, and it's not good for us. It hurts us. But electromagnetic energy is implosion energy. It comes from blasting apart the water molecule and harnessing the hydrogen. So, there's a lot to it, and we don't understand it. Like, I've been interviewed numerous times, as you know, and most people keep calling it electricity. Well, if it's power, then it's electricity. No, it's electromagnetic energy, which is completely different. And so we, again, and how many times have we stumbled upon in this conversation, we don't have that vocabulary. We're not talking about that. It's not in our consciousness to talk about these things. That does not mean for 1 second that the ancients didn't know it.
Sure. You got to think of it in matter and waves, and to define an end product, I think, is wrong, definitely. Let's get into acoustics, Carmen. Are you familiar with any acoustic experiences yourself? Or
Absolutely. And I know that the entirety of the Band of Peace, it's almost like each pyramid has a different angle to the straight sides. 51 degrees, 52 degrees, 53 degrees, and a half, and that. And the chambers are positioned in different places inside each pyramid, and there's different numbers of chambers, and then the bent pyramid has 2 angles. And if you could imagine like a wind harp that you would align to the wind, and then it would actually make music, the sound and light technology was absolutely pivotal for the ancients. And and the Band of Peace is like 15 or so miles long, right? And so it's huge. And so on December 21st, here in 2012, there was 100 people who were standing around Abu Ghraib, which is where they have the crystal altar and the crystal bowls and the base of the obelisk. And we had someone playing 3 crystal bowls and making an acoustic resonance there. And those crystals are huge, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know of another piece of crystal as big as that.
Well, and then in the extension after the last Egypt trip, we went to the White Christmas on the White Desert, we called the trip, and we went to the Crystal Mountain. This entire mountain is made of crystal. I mean, come on. It's just absolutely fascinating. But we have tiny crystals in an Ethernet cable, in a record player, in our watches, in our computers. Nothing that we have can work without these tiny crystals. Well, what about a huge crystal?
You could say we're a crystal technology, Carmen. Whether not an electrical one. We're not an electrical age. We're actually in a crystal age, because the crystals run the electronics and electronics run the electricity.
well, fair enough, but I'm looking outside the window at a bunch of wires, and I wish they weren't there. I mean, Tesla had discovered wireless technology, and J.P. Morgan shut him down because he could see how we could all be enslaved by paying huge utility bills that keep going up so that a few people can make money when it all should be free.
Sure. I wonder about the quartz thing, Carmen, and I'm sure you get theories all the time, but in my own research of the passage graves of Ireland, the passage grave builders were obsessed with Sirius, the Pleiades. They were obsessed with quartz as well. They lined the passages with quartz, and when the sunbeam were obviously aligned to the winter solstice and summer solstice, and when the sunbeam would come in, they would reflect the quartz, and that would change the electromagnetic wave 45 degrees and make it more magnetic. And I know that there was a sunspot minimum in the year 3100, around the time of the Maya started their calendar, and this is the same time that the passage graves were built, and I wonder. A sunspot minimum would also affect fertility. I think there was an experiment done with a woman who lived underground for a period of time. Her fertility cycle stopped, and they need the electromagnetic light of the sun, women, to regulate their menstrual cycle. And I wonder was there a natural drop in fertility, and that the crystals, all Newgrange was like topped like a pyramid. It wasn't flat like it is today. There was a pyramid type top of quartz. It's now slippage and fell apart, but I wonder, was this whole thing like a fertility clinic? Were they going inside the passage graves and trying to conceive or enhance their fertility because of a natural sunspot cycle? I know.
Yes, absolutely. Think about it. And what was compromised in the 18th dynasty in Egypt was the male babies were dying, and there was and Nefertiti and Akhenaten had 6 daughters, and there were no male children, because like the patriarchal Egypt started in 3113 BC along with the Mayan calendar. And King Tut was 8 years old when he was on the throne, and he had help. He had co-regents and that sort of thing. And then in Hatshepsut's time, she was a queen, and she became pharaoh because it seems there was a shortage of males, and the whole thing, when you see, and Hakim's very emphatic about the thymus and the womb being the white crown and the red crown. It's not Upper and Lower Egypt. That always turned my stomach when anybody said that. I knew that wasn't the case, and that's what we do. We imagine divide and conquer and reuniting, and country lines and all of that, and it's just silly. It's not what they were doing at all. But the thymus, we've seen that a couple of times where it's actually in close to the high heart, and it's the hormone that regulates fertility, and the pharaoh would wear it on his head inside a womb. So they had procreation envy, and that's the whole thing. Like Freud came along and talked about penis envy, and I always say that women don't wish for outdoor plumbing. It's not that at all. It's procreation envy. So, even psychologically, philosophically, we've got it all backwards now. We keep shoving those ideas down people's throats, and it doesn't add up. So we're all confused. And so the idea of a male honoring the idea of the female fertility and understanding the hormonal cycles came because that was threatened at various times with the sunspot activity. Maurice Cotterell talks about this.
Sure, I've had Maurice on the show as well. Maurice enlightened me to some of this information, actually, because I'm really...
Well, and he, again, like Chris Dunn, is completely original.
Yeah.
He's counting these different cycles, on King Tut's...
Have you read Maurice's new book, Future Science?
I have not.
You should get a copy.
I've read everyone he's written. I didn't even know he had a new
book. I'll have a chat with him because I have to speak to him pretty soon. And I'll tell you why, because Maurice helped me a bit out on Newgrange and some of my research. But, Maurice actually has this... He's redrawn the atom, and he's a beautiful mix of art, science, spirituality, and I love his work. I really do. And I kind of woke up to alternative history because of Maurice. He's one of the first alternative historians, scientists that I read about. But his new work goes into a new theory of the atom, and I think it could be applied to Leeds Scannell's research. And indeed, I asked him that question, and he said that's actually where he got his original idea from. That he's trying to, Carmen, he's trying to rekindle this kind of electromagnetic gravity thing.
Let me add to that. Okay, and there's a YouTube video from Leeds Scallion, and I had never noticed on those crystal basins at Abu Ghraib that there was a little depression, because there's this lumpy, bumpy thing all the way around the edge, and it kind of looks like gears, but it wouldn't be that because it's made out of solid quartz. But there's the outie bump, and then an innie, if you will. And in this video that I saw on YouTube, they actually took round magnets and put one inside each of these circular discs. Well, the other thing is that the shape of the basin, if you look at the absolute exact shape, it's like a satellite dish, right? And with a crystal satellite dish with magnets in a 360-degree circle, but lots of them, and then they could have been angled, like there's a laser cut hole in them, and people said, oh, they were for cows, and they, they bled them in there. It's like, that's us again. Let's kill an animal, let the blood come out. But they're not blood stained, and they're, I don't know, they're probably, 18, 20 inches across, so you can't fit a cow in there anyway. And it's just like, we're just so ridiculous when we come up with things. But this would have been part of the anti-gravity. And Hakim was all about that too when he talks about the schist disc. And again, they move in that. They say it's a flower vase.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Carmen. I was going to ask you about the schist disc as well, and what you thought of that. And I don't subscribe to that lotus flower idea. I think it's an engineered artifact. I think it.
First of all, you don't have a stone basin, and you don't have a hole in a flower vase. But there's also, I mean, this again is in the pyramid code. Okay, Hakim talks about it spinning and it creating a sound, low sound, pulsing of the earth. And then there's a shield that goes with it. And if you can imagine hundreds of high-level initiates with the sound and light technology and working this, it was creating fields that changed the weight of things. It was able to, and then even Sir Lawrence Gardner and monoatomic gold and changing the specific gravity of something. This is, and you talked about your father. Well, my father, whenever there was a thunderstorm, he would be sitting on the front porch, and I would wake up and drag my blanket down the hall and climb into his lap, and being 3, 4, 5 years old, and he'd say, I think they had anti-gravity when they built Stonehenge.
My dad's actually convinced of that too. Like he probably instilled a really good alternative history in me without even knowing it. Just in terms of exploring mysteries, I really do believe in some level. I don't know whether the anti-gravity could be acoustically based, electromagnetically based. I'm not quite sure.
All of the above. All the combination of them all. But I don't know if you saw, there was another documentary on rebuilding Stonehenge, and they made it out of styrofoam, and then they had trouble moving it and building it. Styrofoam. Let me see. Does styrofoam weigh more or less than a real stone? Let me see. And they couldn't do it. And that's just like trying to recreate a pyramid. They couldn't do it. Even with all our technology now, it's just completely inadequate for these buildings.
Sure. Let's just talk acoustics and Stonehenge for a minute, Karen, because we touched on the acoustics. But I just in my own research, I've been researching Stonehenge and the acoustics effect there, and there's been some great work done on that. But it looks like, I don't know if you know this, but it looks like Stonehenge is in some part an auditorium as well, because as you go out from the centre of the circle, your voice will get louder, or the pitch of the voice gets louder and amplified, and that's to do with the position of the stones affecting the sound waves coming out. They would basically coalesce and join up and cancel each other out, and there would be specific points around the circle. I mean, quite a good distance like that. You would actually hear a really good jump in audible tones like.
Okay, now in Washington, there's a site. It's actually, yeah, you've done your homework. So, I went there and photographed it. It was neat to see where all the blue stones and everything was originally. There's absolutely no energy there, and so they made it out of concrete, and it's pretty and it's nice. But I was just at Stonehenge again in May last year, and there's energy there, and so it has to do with the telluric currents and the Michael lines and the drag and all of that, but it has to do with the construction of the stones. But there's a tremendous amount of energy at Stonehenge.
Yeah, you can feel the buzz there. Have you been to Karnak, Carmen?
I have not. I mean, I've been to Karnak, Egypt a number of times, but not Karnak in Europe, no.
No, yeah, there's some people, I think David Hatcher Childress thinks there's people sailed from Egypt and created another Karnak, actually. Yeah, Karnak, it's like a megalithic theme park. It's insane. There's like rows and rows and rows of like standing stone, like 3,000 standing stones, just like the size of Stonehenge, like. And they're like,
I've definitely seen pictures of it, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like a megalithic theme park is a way of explaining it. But you can really feel the energy there too, Carmen. And I wonder, do these guys who the megalithic civilization, and that's what I concentrate on. But I guess this is all around the 3000 BC era around the world, and I wonder, was there a common hand at work? I talked to Laird Scranton about that, and I want to get into Laird's work as well. And Laird thinks that the Dogon preserved this ancient knowledge, and they marched out of ancient Egypt, and perhaps that they were like a common hand with the megalithic civilization and ancient Egypt. Like they were the original source, perhaps like a source code.
Well, I feel comfortable with the idea that the high-level initiates would have had multi-generations. And then the Islam came along, and it was going to turn it into a different kind of religion. And so the descendants of the original priest and priestess class of Egypt walked out. Sure, why not? And they, of course, don't have a written language, and a lot of their symbols are similar. Why not? Of course. And understanding Sirius and the cycles and all of that. And I think they kept themselves in enough isolation to have preserved some of this knowledge, and they're unabashed about it. They just know it. So yes, I feel pretty comfortable with that.
I know Laird features in the Pyramid Code as well, and I think what he says is like they made a backup copy. They sent people out to make a backup copy, Carmen. And that's a good way to look at it, I think.
Yes, certainly. And again, original work. Laird is a computer programmer. And then he noticed some connections, and he put it together with ancient Egypt. Like, I have a lot of respect for people who say something new, not somebody who's just regurgitating and repeating what everybody else said. I mean, we need to know what other people are saying, and in academic research, that's called a literature review. But we also have to say something new.
Sure. Laird's a Piscean, and so is Maurice as well. They're both Pisceans. They're the sign of the genius, if you ask me. They really are, like, the original geniuses, like, that they seem to put everything together, like. Just talking...
It takes a lot of courage, and Laird, often emphasizes that he doesn't have to care about what academics say because he's not tied to the system, and so he gets to say whatever he wants to say, and people can take it or leave it. But a lot of people who are in the academic field, again, have to toe the party line. They have to say what everybody else says.
But I think the ones that are in the academic field aren't qualified, and what I mean by that is, Carmen, I know just from my own research here that the passage grade builders were obsessed with astronomy, but they didn't ever hire an astronomy to come and analyse the buildings. No, they got archaeologists in, and they went, well, we've nothing to dig up here. We don't have any...
Here's another thing that I think is key to our understanding of all of this. Patriarchy divides and conquers. So archaeology doesn't speak to linguistics, doesn't speak to anthropology, doesn't speak to this and that, geology, and it's all separated, weather patterns, climatology. Well, we can't piece anything together without everything being cross-disciplinary. And so, even if you go to university, you're in one faculty in one department. And so it just doesn't work. We need to have a little bit of everything and to mix and match and to be cross-disciplinary in order to understand things. And so, and that's the whole thing. Numerology, astrology, tarot, psychology. Let's blend it all. Let's put it all together. Let's look at the spiritual, the physical, the mental, the left brain, the right brain. You got the full deck now. But patriarchy's strategy has been to divide us up and to cut us off and to disempower us and to turn us into slaves, debt slaves. Enough already.
Okay, Carmen, hold it right there. We're going to take a break and be back in just a moment. And we're back with your host, E.A. James Swagger, on Capricorn Radio, talking to Carmen Bolter.
Well, joining with what I said a moment ago, the idea of cross-disciplinary, multi-level, multi-dimensional, like the Egyptians, nothing meant one thing. Everything was like a pun. Everything was an acronym. Everything was nature, spiritual, tonal. They were jokers, they everything was like a metaphor. And so we, if anybody says this is what that meant, and of course it's completely naive to think that 4,000 symbols can get reduced to 26 letters, and we were just waiting for English to come along so we could spell your name. It's just, it's laughable, and you're laughing. And so, but anything in Egyptian, everything, their chronology and everything else is deeply symbolic and has more than one meaning. And again, we don't think like that, so we can't imagine them thinking like that.
Exactly. I think more in terms of symbology now, and that hemisphere of the brain thing, and that it really appeals to us, appeals to me anyway, and I can see where they were kind of... I'm looking at Egypt in a new light, Carmen, if you want to call it that, yeah? And I had to kind of go through ancient Egypt. I had to go through what was wrote about it. There's so much there. There's so much there that you have to kind of wrestle with and get through to get to the truth, I guess,
Well, and so much misinterpreted and so much damaged. But by the same token, I was always really concerned about all the artifacts that had left Egypt and thought that they should come back. And Hakim used to say to me, nothing can be lost. Nothing can be lost. And what about all the people that won't come to Egypt that can go and visit things in other museums? And I was just completely beside myself about this for a long time. And then all of a sudden I realized that it's all okay. There was enough of ancient Egypt that was left everywhere. And it's very repetitive. There's a lot of repetitive symbols in different combinations. And places like the Edfu Temple have got little room after room after room with, floor to ceiling, hieroglyphic and frescoes and whatnot. And as I said earlier, every time I go and take more pictures and look at the pictures, I see more. And it's fascinating because they left us enough, that we put enough energy into it, that we're going to be able to discover what they were talking about. But prior to quantum physics being part of our vocabulary, how could we understand that the Egyptians
didn't have the lingo, did we? We didn't have the...
No, and archaeoastronomy, that's a relatively new science.
It's beautiful as well, Carmen. It's a beautiful... I think we needed it. We needed it in the alternative community to say, look, we now have something that's rigid, but is pointing in another direction, and we're now able to kind of date things that weren't able to be dated before.
Yes, but there's still a propensity to drop a precessional cycle or half a cycle off things and look at the lineup, because perhaps in 2450 BC, that lineup came up again.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure. I was going to say, let's just talk energies again, Carmen, because I wanted to kind of get what you think of the energies. Do you think the Dendera lamps were a power device? Do you think the Baghdad battery, because a lot of people seem to put these two together, and I know that you went into that the Baghdad battery was documented in Egypt, not necessarily the two cultures were linked the way they promote it to be.
Well, at the CPAC conference, at Walter Cruttenden's Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, Jason Martell got up on stage and they dimmed the lights, and he had a Baghdad battery made with, I think it was orange juice, and he had fashioned a bulb that was like the Dendera light bulb down in the crypts, and it lit up. It was a weak signal, but I saw it with my own eyes. So that's one thing. The other thing is that in order to get to those crypts, you have to go down the staircase, and it's this narrow passageway. It can't be more than 4 feet wide.
You can turn corners as well. I've been to Egypt 3 times, and I know the Valley of the Kings. When you go down into them places, as soon as you turn the first corner, it's dark. There's nothing.
Yeah, there's no light in there at all. And the other thing is that the Dendera temple, I can show you if I was there with you, there's a chamber that has a hole, and you can see the tops of pillars. So it very much was a temple built on top of another temple, which makes it even more ancient. And the distance from the old riverbed, or the river where it is now, is far enough to depict that would have been one of the oldest temples. And at Abydos, the old temple is below the Temple of Seti, but it's beside. So you can see that there's one below and one above. But at Dendera, it's literally over the top. And so they had to have had some source of light. Otherwise, it would have been black with soot. Now, again, multidimensional, multi-meaning. And so there's a snake in there. There's a small man. It's being held up by a baboon. The baboon is a symbol of time, because apparently they pee every 12 hours. And so the Egyptians cleverly used them as measuring time. There is the Jed, which is a play on the word jinn, which is spirit. But it's the spinal cord of Osiris, which is where all the energy from the brain goes into the body. He represents, reincarnation and cross-dimensional energies. Some people say it looks like a cathode tube that we had in our old televisions. But again, something that's going to translate a signal into a visual. It's Kundalini energy. And then they're not just in the crypt. There's another hall down in Dendera, and I can show you, and way up on the ceiling. Sorry, higher up on the wall, but closer to the ceiling, there's a series of 4 more of those, and most people miss those. But what you also see over and over again in Dendera, and this is a new thing that I've been noticing, is the Ka, the body double. And so there's even one place in Saqqara where there's 4, but basically the person is there and their body double is with them. So there's a distinction in the ancient Egyptian cosmology between the Ba and the Ka. So the Ka is the part that can bilocate. And a lot of people are bilocating in their sleep, and they're going and doing work on ships and helping people, and their physical body is sleeping, and their Ka, or body double, is doing some work elsewhere. The Ba is the part of you that when you die, it's still alive. So when in the ceremony of the weighing of the hearts, when someone would pass, the first thing you'd be met by Anubis, and he'd say, "You're dead." And you'd go, "Oh, I am?" And they'd say, "Check it out, your body's down there." "Oh, okay." So the part that would live on between incarnations and come back into a physical if they were to reincarnate. And so, these sorts of ideas about being able to move between dimensions, or being able to take a signal and turn it into a visual, all of these cross modalities. This is like synesthesia, where you can hear a picture, you can smell the flowers when they're on the television. Babies are able to do this. Right? You see music. This is normal. Hakim emphasized that we had 360 senses in the ancient times, and we're totally dumbed down to 5. And so, again, our vocabulary is absolutely compromised. You can say, "I saw you in my dream." Well, your eyes are closed. Your eyes aren't really working because you're asleep. Well, what do we mean by this? Well, all I'm trying to say by this little piece of the discussion is that the ancients were completely well-versed in transferring between realities, in anti-gravity, popping between, teleportation. This was normal to them.
Crazy.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay, Carmen, I want to talk about, if I don't talk about King Tut and Akhenaten, I'll go insane and haven't asked you, because I know you've been close to this story, and I want to talk about Zahi as well, Zahi Hawass. For the listeners, he's been the head of Egyptian antiquities until recently, the uprising. He's been ousted somewhat, but he tried to link King Tut with Akhenaten, and I'm not sure why he tried to do that. I've heard a couple of people try to disassociate that link. What's that all about, Carmen? What do you feel is going on there?
Okay, now, first of all, I'm just going to say this is a totally loaded subject for me. big charge on it. The 18th dynasty is where my strongest memories come from, both with Hatshepsut and the Amarna period. And I've been to Amarna a couple of times, and it's highly emotional for me. So about 14 years ago, oh God, now I'm forgetting his name. From somebody was doing, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the researcher's name. But he was given the permission to extract some of the DNA from King Tut. And of course, Zahi came along. Oh, security, you can't measure it. But he did Scott Woodward from Utah, Brigham Young University. He was able to do the DNA testing on King Tut's fetuses that were found in his tomb. There were 2 stillborn babies, okay? And Tut married Akhenaten and Nefertiti's youngest daughter, Ankhesenaten. And that was the practice. It was still matrilineal, even when it was patriarchal, because the pharaoh had to marry the daughter of the pharaoh before him. The new pharaoh had to marry the daughter of the pharaoh before him. And that was for the mitochondrial DNA.
I was going to ask you that as well. That's evidence of mitochondrial DNA breeding and genetic breeding.
Absolutely. But we also didn't have that in our vocabulary until recently. And so, okay. So anyway, Scott Woodward, I knew that Zahi was going to do this, okay, years ago. And it happened on February 17th, 2009, that there was a press conference and he was going to announce the DNA testing. Well, first of all, they closed the DNA labs. They brought a new DNA lab into the basement of the National Museum. Then they were saying on National Geographic that they had found Akhenaten's mummy, but they were showing a picture of a skeleton in a fetal position. And they were saying they had done the DNA testing on Akhenaten. You're never going to find Akhenaten. The Amun priesthood was so upset they killed him and cut him into pieces and threw him in the Nile. There's no way. That's kind of the metaphor for Osiris, the 14 pieces. Okay, and they say that Akhenaten was deformed and all that, and the wide hips and all that, terribly threatening because he kind of had a feminine look to him. But it's starseed. Hatshepsut speaks about her father taking on a high-level being, a star being, impregnating her mother, which made her half starseed. And there is the full story of this, which is quite damaged at Deir el-Bahri at the Temple of Queen Hatshepsut. And so, well, Akhenaten and Nefertiti are a couple of generations down the line in the same dynasty, okay? And so they had 6 daughters, and King Tut was no doubt raised in the North Palace with the women. I've got very strong memories about this, and they want to say that Akhenaten was his father. So I'm there listening to this press conference, and the curator for the museum's secretary saw me. I did a little bit of work to find out where this press conference was going to be. And because I've done so much work in the museum and had special permission to do various things, photograph, go into the archives of the National Museum, the secretary recognized me and let me in to the press conference, which was right in, they had closed the museum. And anyway, so there's Zahi going to give the results in Arabic. And I'm like, is he saying what I think he's saying? And I waited till he finished speaking, and he said it again in English. And I heard him in Arabic, and they're trying to say that it's Akhenaten. Well, I think that part of it is it proves that Tut was white. Well, that is more of this PBS network, patriarchal BS. And they're trying to make themselves white Anglo-Saxon, and Egypt is on the African continent. The likelihood, is that a lot of them were black. I mean, who knows? I mean, the Black Madonna, ISIS, all this stuff is racist. And I think that if there's a fundamental point that Zahi was after, it's racist. Yeah.
Zahi's a weird one, isn't he? He's a weird character. I know he's a Gemini, and he is the typical Gemini. He likes the showmanship. He's a Gemini male. They love information, but they like to play games, and he does that time and time again. He lies in the face of evidence. But people just think, why would you do that? But I think he's just being himself. Like he's got his own agenda. He's got his own rules to lead, and I think I don't know, I'd like to think he's just got his hands tied and he can't speak about it, but I think he just enjoys the role too, Carmen.
Well, first of all, he's gone, but in those 3 weeks before Mubarak stepped down, they had this stage thing where guys in black suits were descending from the ceiling of the museum, and they were saying that the people stole these artifacts. No way. Mubarak, his son, Zahi, and Farouk Hosni, the Minister of Culture at the time, were stealing artifacts by the container load and sending them on the black market to be sold, and they lined their pockets. Mubarak was one of the richest men in the world. If you divided by every man, woman, and child the money that he pocketed, that would have given an average family $50,000, which is like 12 years of an average income. the family lives on $2 a day. It was $10,000 for every man, woman, and child. You think that wouldn't go a long way to helping the Egyptians?
Sure. People don't realize too, Carmen, how poor Egypt is. They rely solely on tourism. Solely.
Yeah. Well, when we were there, there was I told you at the beginning of this interview that there were so many stories trying to scare people. We were the only two buses at Saqqara, the only plane on the tarmac going to Luxor and back from Aswan, the only foreigners in the museum. But the point that I was getting to is that from 1977, it used to be that if you spent 1 minute at every exhibit in the National Museum, you'd be in there for 9 months. And Hakim took me in there for 2-hour sessions, and we covered the entire museum, and he gave me his blah blah and his descriptions of everything. And he would say they turned this stone over. On the bottom of it, let me tell you what's there, and they moved the schist disc, and they're not allowed. Well, and I've got photographs from the early days when you were allowed, and they stopped letting you take pictures in the museum. Why? Because they're date and time stamped. Well, I'm telling you, last year in 2011, half of the stuff in the museum was gone. Whole rooms closed. And they did a collection of Hatshepsut statues that hadn't been together since they were found in a hole at Deir el-Bahri. And somebody 20 years after she died took all these statues and dumped them in a hole. And they broke and they put them back together. And it was at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And they made this special room. And I went and I got to be in there by myself without the guard and everything, photographed the whole thing. Those statues never went back to Egypt. No. No, but people don't know that. People don't know the museum like I do because of the work that I did with Hakim.
The time you spent there as well, the time you're there time and time again, you're familiar with it.
Well, and I had permission, coordinated effort between the Egyptian embassy in Ottawa and the Canadian embassy in Cairo to get me special permission to go into the archives of the Rare Books Library of the Faculty of Archaeology of Cairo University and the American University of Cairo Computer Archives and Digital Archives, and in, as I mentioned a minute ago, the archives of the National Museum. And I spent a whole summer every day researching and going through all these books and finding very, very incredible stuff. And so people don't know it like I do. And they haven't spent so much time obsessing over the pictures. Well, now they're down to about a third of the artifacts. And people who had a sensitivity to Egypt, who were with me on this last trip, I had 80 people on my tour, were just horrified in the museum. It's disgusting. It's dirty. It's just awful. Things aren't beautifully lit. It's like a warehouse. It's really, really unfortunate. But Hakim, taught me a little routine of turn left when you go in and, talk about the wigs, male and female, and go along here and, go to the New Kingdom and up into the Tut exhibit. I would take a few steps and go to speak about an artifact. It's gone. A few more steps. It's gone. A few more steps. That one was there. Then you'd see plastic wrapped around things. They're ready to take it out of the museum.
See, I measure everything on what I've seen before, and I lived in London for maybe 4 years. I've actually been there on 2 occasions. The time before that, 2 years. But I used to cycle into London every day, maybe 15 miles in, 15 miles out, and I was doing a degree there, and I would be in uni 3 days a week, and the other 2 days I would still go in, and I would go around the British Museum, and I measure everything on the British Museum, but everything's documented in there. You couldn't. I mean, if something goes, it's got a plaque. It's documented where it's gone to.
Exactly.
It's documented where it's gone.
Where it's gone, when it left, and when it's coming back. That is proper. That's proper practice in a museum. And that's what Hakim was trying to say, museums around the world. So back to what we were saying earlier, when Hakim said nothing can be lost. All of a sudden, the National Museum in Egypt being completely ransacked, and they're blaming the people when it's Mubarak and Zahi, I know, right? And now the artifacts are elsewhere. But it's like it's locking the barn after the horse has been stolen. Like the code has been cracked. We know what they were saying. And it's just a question of people understanding and becoming empowered and seeing that the ancient Egyptians understood the whole thing. They also knew we were going to get deteriorated. And to me, it's the treasure map back to sanity.
Tell me about Hakim. Has Hakim had a pupil, a student, an apprentice, or his son even? Does anybody taken on the lineage of information from Hakim?
Well, me. Okay, so Stephen Mailer has spent a lot of time and just adores Hakim. But I've watched him do Stephen's interpretation of Hakim. So let's leave it at that, because even in his books, I know Hakim didn't say that stuff. So, and forgive me, Stephen, for that. Now, his sons, I spent 10 years hanging out with Hakim. I'd go to his home every day. When I was in Egypt, and he took me to Cairo University and helped me get in. I was the only woman who didn't have my hair covered, and he helped me with the permits to get me into these archives because I had the documentation from the embassies. And he walked me through it and showed me how to take the bus downtown and all this stuff. And but when I would sit with him, first of all, he was a very tough taskmaster. I'd say, well, what about this and what about that? And he wouldn't tell me a thing. And then I'd look and study and read and, try to sort things through. And I'd go, okay, does this fit with this and this and this? Yes. And then he'd open like a floodgates and tell me everything. Well, I'm like, well, why wouldn't you tell me till I already knew? But that's like a Zen master would be like that. Exactly. And so, he was tremendously patient. But I noticed that when people didn't have the ears to hear and they were around him and I was there, he would just speak nonsense. And that's just the way he was. He had secrets, but he would only speak if you fully were able.
He wasn't
to
going to
hear
waste
him.
his time, Carmen. Then he was going to wait. He was going to make sure it was going to the right source, basically.
No, okay. And again, his family was not interested. They did not sit with him. They came and they were polite and they would give him tea and they would, help him do things and they, took care of him in a polite, familial way. Well, then the Pyramid Code was on TV in Egypt. You're going to say?
Sorry, I was just going to say you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. That's what they say over here in this part of the world. So.
Okay, now whenever I was anywhere with Hakim, particularly in the museum, people would say, "Oh, you're so lucky to be working with him," because his guide card was like number 53, and now there's thousands. And so he was one of the first guides, and he studied in Europe, Sweden. And anyway, so his kids seemed to be quite disinterested. But the Pyramid Code played over and over and over, translated into Arabic. And so I think the kids realized that, he was quite a master. And now the kids have taken an interest. Now they're following in his footsteps and leading tours and that sort of thing. But it seems to me that they tripped into it after he passed. And I think the Pyramid Code had something to do with it. That's what I...
Yeah. Well, that's a shame in one way, but good in another, I suppose. That, that's the beauty of the Pyramid Code. If the Pyramid Code hadn't have come out, Carmen, there's key facts in there that I know I haven't sourced anywhere else, Carmen. I'll just put it like that. And you've got John Anthony West, the Magical Egypt Symbolist Tour DVD series. You got yourself, if you take them 2 box sets, I mean, there's a wealth of information there in those 2 DVD box sets, Carmen. There really, really is, if it hadn't been made, half the world wouldn't be aware of some of the stuff, Carmen. Really wouldn't.
Well, what's fascinating, okay, my mandate inside me, what Spirit directed me to do, was to make a documentary that would trigger high-level initiates' memory from people who already knew. And that's exactly the feedback. I've gotten, tens of thousands of letters from people. And the most common comment is that when they finished watching it, they watched it again. And people say, oh, I watched it 20 times. Oh, I watched it 50 times. The highest that anyone's ever told me, they watched it 100 times. And every time they watch it, there's something new.
And the thing is, Carmen, for me, I'm Mr. Facts, man. I am obsessed with facts and information, but I still watch that and I'm just watching it new and new again, and I could recite facts, specific things that I read in a book, but I just watch that over and over. There's so much in it. It's so condensely packed. It's just rolling the facts out, and even I don't ever remember. I think the base of the pyramid is built on a platform. I've never seen that anywhere before. I don't know where that.
You know how I know that was because I was riding a stallion that had not been out of the barn for 3 months. They didn't tell me that. And it reared up and was sliding on the stones in front of the second pyramid. And I was training for the nationals in dressage. So I had an Arabian horse for 10 years. And so I was on the saddle until the horse was actually, completely off balance. And so then I fell onto the rocks and the horse nearly fell on top of me. So they thought I'd never walk again. But I was lying in front of the second pyramid and I could see it out of the corner of my eye. And that's when I saw that the platform was bigger because I had to lie there until somebody came to help me. And that's when I noticed
That's funny. That's the thing, Carmen. I mean, I haven't seen that related anywhere before, and that's what I'm saying. There's key facts in there that's specific to the Pyramid Code. It's specific to your research, Carmen. And thank you for bringing that out because, people are now aware of that. People can go away and do research themselves from stuff that's in there. And again, John Anthony West in his own symbologist tour of Egypt as well, in his own right. There's 2 separate documentaries. One tackles each different thing. And I think another thing you brought up, Carmen, is the migration of the Nile. And that migration of the Nile takes a long epoch. And you liken it to Tiwanaku in Bolivia. That it was I think it's the Acapana pyramids that was built on the waterfront and is now nowhere near Lake Titicaca. That the geological time frame for that to migrate is so long, just like the Nile to migrate from the pyramids. Well,
and I won't take credit for that. That's something that was in my bones, but that's Hakim. Hakim all the way, and he took me to the sites all the way, the Band of Peace. He took me to those sites and he'd say, look, the water used to come to here. And then, of course, everywhere you look, it's obvious. And so I was able to fill that in and get some, Google Earth maps to show the oases and whatever. But he took me physically to these places and showed that to me. So I credit him with that
That's
theory.
great, and that's fair enough. And you did document it too,
And
though,
also,
Carmen. You did document
in
it.
John Anthony,
You did document it too, so fair duty to you too. Not.
well, yes, and without the series, people wouldn't know about it. So there was a bridge between Hakim's knowledge.
That's the thing I'm trying to get at. Hakim was the source, and you've got this lovely bridge, and you've brought a lot of people together in the Pyramid Code, Carmen. You really have, like.
Yeah, there's 14 voices in there, and John Anthony West's work was largely from Schwaller de Lubitz. Yeah. But again, he was the wisdom keeper, and the information wasn't exemplified and brought to light. And so it's a similar thing to take somebody's ancient knowledge and verify it.
If I had my way, and I kind of say this at the end of some shows sometimes, Carmen, if I had my way, I would have a round table of investigators for ancient Egypt. If I was on the Antiquities team, I would just say, right, start again. Get Hancock, Boval, John West, Robert Schoch, Christopher Dunn, and yourself, Carmen, in there, and get you all in on a round table like a think tank and go, give you the run of Egypt and go, let's start dissecting this place. Let's figure out what these guys knew. I know we know a lot now, Carmen. I know that, but I'm just figuratively speaking, But
yeah, but you know what? I think the answer is slightly different. Regina Meredith and Jay Widener with Guyam TV have invited a round table about pyramids, and they've offered Samir from Bosnian Pyramids and me, and Valery Uvarov, who built a new pyramid, and he's asked me to do the next documentary series, and I'm working on that now. I've been collecting footage. It's in Russia, and the new series, it's called The New Atlantis, and it's about pyramid energy in new pyramids now. And so the Bosnian pyramid is in a unique situation because there's no restriction on the excavations. There's been people from 50 countries volunteering to excavate this year, and last year it was from 17 countries. And there's an awful lot to excavate, but people are freely able to come and participate. And you can do research. And so there's a number of different researchers who have measured the energy fields. And Philip Coppens actually sent me some information from the other side the other day. I found a 50-line passage from him that came through Skype that was not there before, that has all these details of researchers and labs and their proper spelling of the names, and the thing is perfectly punctuated. And it was date and time stamped when I was actually speaking to him on Skype when he was in Scotland, and we were planning the 2012 Convergence panel that he was not able to attend because he was in the hospital. And so there's absolutely no way that was there before. And it's got all these details that, of people who have done research. And I am telling you, it's another treasure trove. And so, to me, there's magic going on. There's communication from the other side. There's past life memory and present life, bridges that are happening. And all of it together, and all of us together, and all of the pyramid sites and what you're saying about Karnak and everything else is fitting together. And there aren't too many people who are able to pull the whole thing together because people become highly specialized. And they're looking, at only one aspect of something or only the engineering aspects of it or whatever. And so it's high time that we put it together in a cross-disciplinary multimedia fashion. Now, the other thing is that when I first started shooting the Pyramid Code, there were people who were assisting me who I ended up not using because they kept saying, I don't understand. I said, look, we're listening to Hakim now. You're going to give me a chance to make animations and bridge it together with voiceover and edit it in a way that you can understand it. You're not going to understand him now. You need to be a fly on the wall, and let me get the information, let him speak, and I will sculpt it in a way that you'll be able to understand it. So there's 174 animations in the Pyramid Code to bring these pieces together. And that's why people can understand it. It's partially the way it's edited. It's carried by the music, which was composed originally by Michael Damon, who's a genius. And so we ended up having some real geniuses work on this. The cinematography was done by Eric Phillips Horst. We had to reshoot the whole thing because the first videographers were not competent. And he came to Egypt with me 3 times, and we just reshot on a brand new camera. That's super, super incredible footage. So Eric was with me again, and that footage will contribute in the New Atlantis. And also I'm thinking that I will use Hakim's voice and interview other scientists, not the same cast of characters that's in the Pyramid Code. And Michael Damon will write the music again. And the reason that Valery Uvarov invited me to create this new series is because he likes the style of the Pyramid Code. And it's aired in 30 countries and been translated into numerous languages. So he saw it in Russia, in Russian.
Beautiful.
And that's
immensely successful. And that's the thing, Carmen, that the production of it and the animation of the graphics and things, that's what makes a really good production. The music. Do you know what I actually loved as well? the footage of the local people and the donkeys and the carts and the local buildings and the travel in between the places, and because I've been there 3 occasions, and I went back there. I was just dreaming. I was like going, oh, that's what it's like to travel between place to place, and that kind of I kind of like that. I like Cairo. Cairo is like 20 miles by 20 miles of insanity, just people coming and going, and and then people don't realize that you have Pizza Hut and McDonald's right beside the pyramids, it's the city is encroaching on the pyramids, so it's such a mixture of, I don't know, what modern insanity versus ancient technology and ancient cultures, so it's
yeah. Well, on this last trip, I kept saying to Eric, who brought an assistant with him, that it's, get the nature shots, get the birds, get the flocks of birds. And they went on the balloon ride again, and you get some amazing footage there. So, I'm all about using brand new footage for the new series. And I'll be going to Göbekli Tepe and to the Bosnian pyramid, and including footage on that, and going to Russia and filming the new pyramid and all of that. That'll happen this summer.
Yeah, I was talking to Robert, obviously, on the show there, and Robert Schock, he's doing a tour of Göbekli Tepe. I'm tempted to go with him, but I want to go to Armenia to look up Armenian Stonehenge, and it's going to conflict with my travel plans. I do want to go. I think I'm probably going to see him at Megalithomania anyway, so not to worry. But, I think Robert Schock's, he's just come back from Egypt in January, and
yeah, I saw him there. I spoke on a panel.
Oh, did you?
There.
So that was that's when you were talking about, just recently. Okay, yeah. I think Robert would love...
And he was speaking at CPAC in October in Palm Springs, and
sure.
I spoke.
I have to say, if it wasn't for you, Carmen, speaking about Walter Cruttenden and CPAC, I wouldn't have known about Walter Cruttenden. And if I hadn't known about Walter Cruttenden, I wouldn't have, because I've been on Walter Cruttenden's podcast for my own book. If I hadn't have gone on to Walter Cruttenden podcast, I wouldn't have known about the podcast radio thing. And therefore, after talking to Walter, Walter said, you should do this thing if you want to do your podcast. Give me a bit of advice. And, I'm up and running on my own podcast radio show now. So if I hadn't have been for you putting in the CPAC elements and the pyramid code, I probably wouldn't be having the show with you today, Carmen. So,
well, you're not alone there, because when I spoke at CPAC, Walter acknowledged me, and I said, I'm ready to get up on the podium, and he's up there saying, I'm here to thank Dr. Carmen Bolter, and I'm like, I just about blurted out, why? Well, we show CPAC in the pyramid code, and apparently a third to half of his audience is coming because they looked it up because of the pyramid code.
That's what I did.
And I didn't realize, I had no idea.
That's what I did. I didn't know who Walter Cruttenden was, and I went, CPAC? CPAC, what's that? Conference and Procession in Ancient Knowledge, and I just jumped on it, and I went, I really love it. Walter's offered me to come over. He's not doing the CPAC this year coming. He offered me over last year, and I know he's not doing it this year, but he's doing it in 2014, so I think I'll definitely be at that one.
Well, and the audience is so beautifully prepared. Somebody like yourself, look at all the names you've dropped and the people who you've researched and whatever. This is a cast of characters. It takes every one of us to put the whole story together. But one thing you may be interested in is there is a 7-day tour in Bosnia, the 1st to the 7th of September. And then the 8th is a conference, and Klaus Donna, who's done all that work with misfitting artifacts and giants and whatnot, will be there. And I'm planning on being there as well. The 1st to the 7th is the tour, and the 8th is the conference. And all of this is by the Bosnian pyramids. And so I'll be doing 2 teleseminars with Dr. Sam in the near future here. And so
sure. I was thinking of getting Klaus on the show, actually. So you've just sealed the deal for me. I'll have to approach Klaus to get him on the show now, because I have listened to some of his podcasts and YouTube videos too. So that's
brilliant. He's done brilliant work, and he's just unearthed things that other people have not been able to put into place. And so he's really made a good contribution.
Sure. We're way over the time, Carmen. I'm going to ask you one more thing before we go. It's about the lotus flower and the hallucinogen aspect, entheogens, and there was a BBC documentary on the effects of the blue lotus flower, and was it like a hallucinogen? Some people liken it to a hashish effect, but it may have been actually more of a altered state of consciousness type ayahuasca brew type drink. Do you subscribe to the whole therianthrope thing that Graham Hancock does? Is it like, do you think that they were going like a spiritual technology from these hallucinogens? Do you subscribe to that theory and belief?
It's not a theory. This is one of my favorite memories. And now Blue Lotus itself is, we're not sure if it's completely extinct, but there's a confusion between the Blue Lily and the Blue Lotus. And there are people who have dried the Blue Lily flowers. And I think it's the BBC documentary Sacred Weeds, Blue Lily. Yes, I've watched that. Yes. I've watched that several times, and they're doing the experiments, but they found some flowers, and they were using the fresh flowers, and what they learned is that the psychotropic properties are activated with wine. And I actually ran some experiments. My friend said, well, what if you put it in vodka? And of course, absolutely nothing happens with that. But the blue lily is not as strong, and the dried flowers are bitter, the petals. And if you soak them in wine, which we've done, until they reconstitute and they actually turn into the flowers kind of puff up again, and drink the wine. And of course, we don't know what dosages and whatnot, but it does have a dual effect. It makes the body extremely centered and very calm, and it makes you very mentally alert. But in that calmness in the body, there's a sensual kind of pull to it. And I mean, what a great combination. And when it's finished, it's just finished. But what they were doing is eating the flowers. So you see, I mean, I've got a collection of photographs with the blue lily, the lotus, sorry, the stem wrapped around a wine jar and over and over and over again. And Hakeem was, onto this as well, because the lily, sorry, I keep mixing them up. Lotus, I'm not mixing them up. The lotus is a sign of the sacred feminine. The papyrus is a sign of the sacred masculine. And so they were using this, but it was only for the high level initiates. They also had a different kind of aromatherapy one where they would use it to do out of body experiences and go to there's star chambers underneath the plateau. And as the planet would rotate and a certain star would end up above, there'd be 4 attendants. They would sniff this blue lotus, the one person who was going to go, they'd go off and have a star journey, and then they'd come back. The attendants would make sure they were back in their body, and then they would go for 3 days in isolation to be able to ground and remember the information, because it's one thing to leave, but the trick is to return with the knowledge. All of this was connected to the blue lotus. So there's a few of us now that are connecting to try to find an original flowers to perhaps cultivate them, but it seems that they're extinct. And John Steele is an aromatherapist that I studied with, and he really went on a worldwide quest to find the blue lotus. And in the end, he gave up. He did come up with something to me that smells like perfume, and when I smell it, I'm like, no, that's not it. But even I've got real instincts about this, including when my friend was saying, oh, no, I think they used white wine. I'm like, no, they used red wine. I'm like, and then I don't even know who's talking when I say stuff like that. It's just the way I remember it, because there's something about the psychotropic properties that came out. But this is not a drug. This is food. There's nothing altered about it. It's a dried flower, and it's wine. And wine is, a fermentation, and it's, again, natural. It's not chemicals. But the combination is similar to ayahuasca. Has to be a combination. But I think of it as hormone food. Okay, so you get a little flushed, but the thing is, you don't drop down. It's not even like sugar, where you eat a candy bar and then the next thing you know, you crash. That's a drug. Like sugar is refined like heroin and cocaine, right? It's a drug. And so anyway, that's the scoop on
Sure,
that.
I'm glad I asked you that now, Carmen. I really am, because I know you had gone into therianthrope art with Graham Hancock in the documentary as well, and the Pyramid Code, and indeed I have read all of Graham Hancock's work. I love Graham Hancock as an author. He is prolific, and everybody knows that. But when I'd read Supernatural, in my own research, he's gone into entoptic phenomena, and altered states of consciousness have this artwork associated with it. And in the Passage Graves of Ireland, we got this entoptic phenomena encoded on the passage graves. And I wondered myself, just that's why I was asking, I wondered myself, was there a hallucinogen effect or an acoustically induced effect, or both? And in my own research, I had a group of people just recently in January there use entheogens, psilocybin mushrooms, and acoustics separately on different occasions, and both on the same occasion.
No, so it's not hallucinogenic. It's extremely mild, and maybe it's because it's lily, not lotus. I don't expect that it's dangerous. As I said, I expect that it's food, and it shows you over and over and over and over and over. You see how they were going to these rituals, they were dancing, they were sensuous with one another, they were having a really good time, and nobody was trying to stop them and tell them it was illegal.
Yeah, they weren't lying around out of it totally without their senses. That's the thing, I think. Yeah, because there's artwork depicting them sipping the lotus flower drinks in big vats with tubes and stuff. Yeah.
Well, and wearing an extra flower. So, so that you always had one there if you needed another one. But anyway, I just think it's a beautiful thing, and it's not dangerous. And there's a lot more interest in it now. And I don't think we found the exact formula because we don't have the flowers. But I'm not giving up. We're going to keep looking, because if there's one flower left, we can make more. So a lot of times when people say things are extinct, they're severely endangered. But, if you find any, you can bring it back. So that's the quest, and I'll spend the rest of my life on that if it takes that long.
I think the BBC documentary's maybe been a bit misleading in that respect then. I'm not too sure, but just on what you say. Okay, Carmen.
But the title is Blue Lily.
Yeah, Blue Lily. I see. Well, it's not misleading. It's been misleading that I didn't just connect the two together. I think the lotus flower is definitely probably something distinctively different. It's a mistake to probably think the two of them are the exact same. I think maybe, but Yeah. Okay, Carmen, we're at the top of the hour. We're way over the time. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Give your website out again there, Carmen, for people to get in touch with you and look at your future research. And you have a tour coming up this year as well, yeah?
Yeah, I'll be going after Bosnia, September 9th to 20th. It's Exotic Egypt. That'll be posted once I get the confirmed itinerary on pyramidcode.com. And I invite people to come to interactive-u.com because I'll be teaching a course called the Pyramid Code, one on angels and archetypes and one on exotic Egypt. But there's 34 courses and 10 faculties. We're probably going to launch in maybe 3 weeks. It's an online learning and social action network.
Sure. That's great, Carmen. And it's such a pleasure having you on the show. I hope you're going to come back again, have a chat again sometime. It's been such a pleasure, So, again, thank you for coming on the show, Carmen.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure for me because you've done your homework. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for coming on.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
There you go. That was Dr. Carmen Bolter. What a fascinating, knowledgeable lady. Carmen has made such an impact for me and so many others with respect to an alternative viewpoint of ancient Egypt, which for me is a more accurate one. If you haven't checked out the Pyramid Code 5-part documentary series, please do so. It's a wealth of knowledge. And you'll see parts of Egypt and knowledge that you haven't seen before. I guarantee you that. That's all for now, folks. I have Dr. Rita Louise and Santos Bonacci mid-March. In the meantime, I have to take care of my own radio campaign and some travel to Denmark and Sweden. So I shall be back on the air on the 13th of March. And stay tuned to your host, E.A. James Swagger, on Capricorn Radio. And don't forget to subscribe, folks.